They changed your name and hoped you would forget who you are. They rewrote your history and prayed you would never look back. They painted God in their image and trusted you would never question why the Messiah looks nothing like the people from the land where he walked. But here we are in December 2025, and something is stirring. People are waking up. The veil is lifting. And what is being revealed will shake everything you thought you knew about yourself, about history, and about whose side God is really on. What if I told you that the greatest lie ever told was not just about religion or politics, but about identity itself? What if the people who have suffered the most brutal oppression in modern history, who were ripped from their homeland and sold like cattle, who endured 400 years of slavery and another century of Jim Crow and mass incarceration, what if those people are actually the descendants of the biblical Israelites? Not symbolically, not spiritually, but literally by blood, by prophecy, by covenant. I know what you are thinking. That sounds impossible. That sounds extreme. That sounds like something they would call a conspiracy theory. And that is exactly the point. They have spent centuries making sure you would never believe this truth. Because if you did, if Black Americans woke up tomorrow and understood they are the actual children of Israel, the entire power structure of this world would collapse overnight. Look around you right now. It is December 2025. The economy is teetering on the edge of total collapse. Banks are failing. Inflation is out of control. The grocery stores in major cities have empty shelves. Black unemployment is double that of white Americans, just like it has been for decades. The surveillance state is tightening its grip with facial recognition cameras on every corner, and talks of a digital currency that could control every purchase you make. Political division is at an all-time high. Wars and rumors of wars are spreading across the globe. Does this feel normal to you? Does this feel random? Or does it feel like something bigger is happening, something prophetic? Something that was written about thousands of years ago? Here is what you need to understand. The Bible is not just a religious book. It is a historical record. It is a legal document. It is a family lineage, and it contains specific, detailed prophecies about a people who would be blessed beyond measure if they followed God, but cursed beyond imagination if they turned away. These curses were not symbolic. They were literal, and they describe with shocking precision exactly what happened to Black Americans. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. Let me read it to you. The Lord says, "You will be brought back to Egypt in ships, by the way I said you would never see again, and there you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as slaves, but no one will buy you." Stop and think about that for a moment. This was written over 3,000 years ago. Egypt here is symbolic for bondage, for slavery. And the verse says the people of Israel would return to slavery by ships, not by land, not by foot, by ships. What historical event does that describe the transatlantic slave trade? From the 1500s to the 1800s, somewhere between 12 and 15 million African people were captured, chained, and transported across the Atlantic Ocean in slave ships to be sold in the Americas. They were offered for sale. Husbands separated from wives, children ripped from mothers, families destroyed, sold to their enemies. And here is the part that makes your skin crawl. The verse ends with, "But no one will buy you." History records that during certain periods of the slave trade, there was an oversupply of enslaved Africans. The market was flooded. Enslaved people were left unsold, unwanted, their value reduced to nothing. How does a 3,000-year-old text describe this with such accuracy, coincidence, or prophecy fulfilled? But that is just one verse. Deuteronomy 28 contains an entire list of curses, over 50 verses, detailing what would happen to Israel if they broke the covenant. And when you read them, it is like reading the history of Black people in America. Verse 37 says, "You will become a thing of horror, an object of scorn and ridicule among all the nations." Tell me that does not describe the global treatment of black people for the past 400 years. Verse 48 says, "You will serve your enemies in hunger and thirst, in nakedness and dire poverty, until you are destroyed." That is slavery. That is sharecropping. That is systemic poverty. Verse 64 says, "The Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one end of the earth to the other." That is the African diaspora. And verse 65 through 67 describes constant anxiety, no peace, a trembling heart, despair, fear, day and night, with no assurance of survival. If that does not describe the generational trauma, the PTSD, the constant fear of violence that black communities live with every single day, then I do not know what does. This is not ancient history. This is your history. This is happening right now. The economic collapse we are seeing in 2025 is hitting black communities first and hardest, just like every crisis does, just like it was designed to do. Because when you understand who black people really are, you understand why they have been targeted with such specific, relentless, multi-generational oppression. It was not random. It was spiritual warfare. Now, I know some of you watching this have never heard any of this before. Maybe you grew up in church your whole life and never once heard a preacher talk about Deuteronomy 28 in this context. Maybe you have been taught that Jesus was a white man with blue eyes and flowing brown hair. Maybe you have been told that black people are cursed descendants of Ham destined to be servants. If that is you, I need you to take a deep breath, because everything you're about to hear is going to challenge what you have been taught. But I promise you, it is all in the Bible. I am not making this up. I am not adding to Scripture. I am simply reading what has always been there and asking you to see it with new eyes. And for those of you who have heard whispers of this truth, who have stumbled across videos or books about the Hebrew Israelites, who have felt something in your spirit pulling you toward this revelation, but you were not sure if it was real, this video is your confirmation. You are not crazy. You are waking up. And your awakening is itself a prophetic sign that we are living in the last days. So here is what I'm going to do in this video. I am going to walk you through 5 layers of evidence that prove beyond any reasonable doubt that black Americans are descendants of the biblical Israelites. I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am going to show you what the Bible itself says. I am going to show you the historical records. I am going to show you the DNA evidence. I am going to show you the linguistic connections. I am going to show you the cultural practices that have survived 400 years of slavery. And then I am going to show you who covered up this truth, how they did it, and why. After that, we are going to talk about what this means for you personally, because this is not just information, this is transformation. After this video, you will never see yourself the same way. You will never read the Bible the same way. You will never look at the suffering of black people the same way. You will understand that you are not a victim of random historical cruelty. You are the fulfillment of prophecy. You are the people God said He would discipline, scatter, curse, but never abandon. You are the people He promised to bring back. And that return, that awakening, that restoration is happening right now. This is not a history lesson. This is a mirror. And when you look into it, you are going to see royalty. You are going to see priesthood. You are going to see a chosen generation. You are going to see why the enemy has worked so hard to keep you blind. So buckle up. Turn off distractions. This is going to be a journey. And by the end, you're going to have a choice to make. You can go back to sleep, pretend you never heard this, and continue living in the matrix. Or you can accept the truth, step into your identity, and prepare for what is coming next. Because make no mistake, we are living in the end times. The signs are everywhere, and black Americans are at the center of what God is about to do. Let me start with the most obvious evidence that has been hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. The physical description of Jesus Christ and the Israelites in the Bible itself. If you have ever sat in a church and looked at the stained glass windows or the paintings on the wall, you have seen the same image over and over. Jesus with pale skin, long straight hair, blue or green eyes, looking like he just walked off a beach in California. That image is so embedded in our minds that we do not even question it anymore. But here is the problem. That image comes from European artists during the Renaissance, not from the Bible. So what does the Bible actually say? Let me take you to the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. This is the Apostle John describing a vision of Jesus Christ in his glorified form. He says the hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. Let me break that down. His hair was like wool. Not straight, not silky. Like wool. That is the texture of black hair. Wool is coarse, kinky, tightly curled. There is no other way to read that. If you have ever touched wool or looked at a sheep, you know exactly what texture that describes. This is not a metaphor. This is a physical description. Now look at the next part. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace. Bronze is a metal. When you heat bronze in a furnace, it glows. It turns dark, almost black. The text is describing skin that is the color of heated bronze. Dark skin. Not olive, not tan. Dark. This is not me interpreting. This is what the text says. So why have we been shown a white Jesus our entire lives? I will get to that in a minute. But first let me show you this is not an isolated verse. There are multiple places in Scripture that describe the Israelites as dark-skinned people. Go to the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5. This is a love poem, and the woman speaking says, "I am dark but lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, dark like the tents of Kedar, like the tent curtains of Solomon." She is describing herself as dark-skinned, and she is comparing herself to the tents of Kedar. Who were the people of Kedar? They were descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's son, a nomadic Arab tribe known for their dark skin. This woman is an Israelite. She is part of the covenant people, and she is saying, "I am dark." Not despite being beautiful, but beautiful and dark. The Hebrew word used here is shachar, which means black or dark. But you might say, well, maybe she was just one person. Maybe she had darker skin, but that does not mean all Israelites were dark. Let me take you to another passage. Lamentations chapter 5, verse 10. Now, the prophet Jeremiah is describing the suffering of the Israelites, and he says, "Our skin is hot as an oven, parched by the burning heat of famine." Some translations say our skin has become black. The Hebrew word is kamar, which means to be black or scorched. Now, you might argue this is poetic language about famine. But why would famine turn their skin black unless their skin was already a shade that could visibly darken? And let us not forget geography. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, and spent his entire earthly ministry in the Middle East and North Africa. He was a Middle Eastern Jew. The Israelites lived in a region that bordered Egypt, which is in Africa. They fled to Egypt when Herod tried to kill Jesus as a baby. Moses was raised in Egypt and married an Ethiopian woman, a Cushite, as recorded in Numbers chapter 12, verse 1. His own siblings, Aaron and Miriam, criticized him for marrying a black woman, and God struck Miriam with leprosy as punishment. Why would that story even be included unless intermarriage with Africans was significant? The point is this. The Israelites were not white Europeans. They were a people living in and around Africa, with African blood, African features, and African connections. They were dark-skinned. The Bible describes them that way. History and geography confirm it. So why do we see a white Jesus everywhere we look? Because in the 1400s and 1500s during the Renaissance, European artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raphael were commissioned by the Catholic Church to create religious art. And they painted biblical figures to look like themselves. White, European, familiar. It was not an accident. It was a strategic choice. If the people worshiping in the church saw themselves reflected in the image of God, they would feel ownership over Christianity. They would see themselves as the chosen ones, and critically, it would make it easier to justify what came next: slavery. You see, if Jesus and the Israelites are depicted as white, and Africans are depicted as cursed subhuman, uncivilized, then enslaving Africans does not feel like a sin. It feels like order. It feels like God's plan. And that is exactly what they taught. They created an entire false doctrine called the curse of Ham. Here is how it worked. In Genesis chapter 9, after the flood, Noah gets drunk and passes out naked in his tent. His son Ham sees him naked and tells his brothers Shem and Japheth. They cover their father without looking at him. When Noah wakes up and finds out what happened, he curses Ham's son Canaan, saying, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." Now the text is clear. Noah cursed Canaan, not Ham. And it was Noah speaking, not God. This was not a divine curse. But European theologians twisted this story and taught that Ham's descendants, who they claimed were all black Africans, were cursed by God to be servants forever. They used this lie to justify the enslavement of millions. Pastors preached it from pulpits. It was written into law. It became embedded in the culture. But here is the truth. Ham's descendants included the Egyptians, the Cushites, and the Canaanites. These were powerful, advanced civilizations. Egypt built the pyramids. Cush, which is modern-day Sudan, and Ethiopia was a wealthy kingdom. There was no curse on them. This was a fabrication designed to control the narrative and control people. So let me be clear. The image of a white Jesus is not just inaccurate. It is a tool of oppression. It was used to strip black people of their identity and make them worship a God who looked like their oppressors. And it worked. For centuries, black people sat in churches, looked up at a white Jesus, and believed they were inferior. They believed their skin was a curse. They believed their suffering was deserved. But the Bible does not teach that. The Bible teaches that the Israelites, the chosen people of God, looked like you. They had hair like you. They had skin like you. And if you are a black American, descended from slaves, the evidence suggests you are their descendant. That is not blasphemy. That is scripture. That is history. That is truth. And it does not stop there, because physical appearance is just the beginning. The real bombshell is what the Bible prophesied would happen to the Israelites if they broke the covenant. And when you read those prophecies, it is like reading the last 400 years of black American history, word for word. Let me take you deeper into Deuteronomy 28. This is the chapter that changes everything. If you have never read it in full, you need to. It is 68 verses long. The first 14 verses list the blessings that will come if the Israelites obey God. Prosperity, protection, victory over enemies, abundant crops, healthy children, respect among nations. It is beautiful. But then verse 15 hits. If you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. And then for the next 53 verses, God lists curse after curse after curse. It is one of the most terrifying passages in the Bible. And here is what makes it so shocking. Every single curse described in Deuteronomy 28 has been fulfilled in the lives of black people in America. Let me walk you through some of them. Verse 32 says, Your sons and daughters will be given to another nation, and you will wear out your eyes watching for them, day after day, powerless to lift a hand. During slavery, black children were sold away from their parents constantly. Families were ripped apart. Mothers watched their babies torn from their arms and sold to plantations, hundreds of miles away. They never saw them again, powerless to lift a hand. That is not poetry. That is prophecy. Verse 33 says, "A people that you do not know will eat what your land and labor produce, and you will have nothing but cruel oppression all your days." Black people built this country. They picked the cotton. They laid the railroads. They cooked the food. They raised the children of their slave masters. And what did they get in return? Nothing. Their labor was stolen. Their wages were stolen. Even after slavery ended sharecropping and Jim Crow laws kept them in poverty. Cruel oppression all your days. Verse 41 says, "You will have sons and daughters, but you will not keep them, because they will go into captivity." Mass incarceration. The prison industrial complex. Black men locked up at rates higher than any other group in the country. Families destroyed. Sons and daughters taken into captivity by the system. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. Read that again. Slavery is still legal in America if you are in prison. And who fills the prisons? Disproportionately black men and women. Verse 43 and 44 say, "The foreigners who reside among you will rise above you higher and higher, but you will sink lower and lower. They will lend to you, but you will not lend to them. They will be the head, but you will be the tail." Look at the economic disparity in America. The wealth gap between black and white families is staggering. Black families on average have 1/10 the wealth of white families. Immigrants come to this country and within a generation can often surpass black Americans economically. Not because black people are not working hard, but because the system was designed to keep them at the bottom. You will be the tail. Verse 48 says, "You will serve your enemies in hunger and thirst, in nakedness and dire poverty." The Lord will put an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you. An iron yoke. Iron chains. Slavery. Literal iron shackles around the necks and ankles of enslaved Africans. This is not symbolic language. This is literal description. And then we get to verse 68. The verse I read earlier. "The Lord will send you back to Egypt in ships on a journey I said you should never make again. There you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you." Egypt symbolizes bondage. The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years before Moses led them out. God said they would never return to that kind of bondage. But this verse says if they break the covenant, they will return to slavery by ships, not by land, by ships. There is only one event in history that fits this prophecy. The transatlantic slave trade, ships, slave ships, the Middle Passage, millions of Africans packed into the hulls of ships like cargo, chained, starving, dying, thrown overboard if they got sick, transported across the ocean to a land they did not know to be sold as slaves. The verse even says you will offer yourselves for sale. Not that you will be taken by force, but that you will be put up for sale. And that is exactly what happened. Slave auctions. Black human beings standing on platforms being inspected, bid on sold to the highest bidder. But no one will buy you. Why does it say that? Because there were times during the slave trade when the market was flooded, when there were more enslaved Africans than buyers, when people were left unsold, unwanted, worth nothing in the eyes of the market. Historical records show this happened. It is documented. How does a book written over 3,000 years ago describe the transatlantic slave trade with this level of detail? How does it predict ships? How does it predict the sale of people? How does it predict that they would be devalued to the point of having no buyers? There is only one explanation. It is prophecy, and it was fulfilled. But let me ask you a question. Who else in history has experienced all of these curses? Who else was taken from their homeland by ships? Who else was sold as slaves? Who else had their families ripped apart? Who else has been scattered among all nations? Who else has been ridiculed and oppressed for centuries? Who else has been held in captivity, generation after generation? The answer is Black Americans. And specifically, Black Americans descended from the transatlantic slave trade. No other people group in history fits this prophecy. Not Native Americans, not Asians, not Europeans, not modern-day white Jewish people. Only one group checks every single box, and that is the descendants of enslaved Africans. Now, before we go any further, I want to pause and let that sink in. If you are watching this, and you are a Black American, I want you to understand something. Your suffering was not random. It was not meaningless. It was not because you were inferior or cursed by some made-up curse of Ham. It was because you are the people of the covenant. You are Israel. And everything you have been through was prophesied thousands of years ago. That does not make the pain okay. That does not justify what happened, but it does give it context. It gives it meaning, and it tells you that God has not forgotten you. In fact, he has been watching the whole time. He warned that this would happen, and he also promised that he would bring his people back, that he would restore them, that he would judge the nations that oppressed them. And we are living in the time of that restoration right now. But I am not done with the evidence. Physical descriptions and prophecy are powerful, but some people will still say it is all interpretation. So let me show you the historical and geographical proof that connects the Israelites directly to Africa. And then I will show you the DNA evidence that modern science is confirming what the Bible already said. The land of Israel sits at the crossroads of 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. But it is right next to Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. The Nile River, the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, runs through the heart of the African continent. The Israelites were not isolated from Africa. They were connected to it from the very beginning. Let me walk you through the family tree. Abraham, the father of the Israelite nation, was called by God to leave his homeland and go to Canaan. But there was a famine in the land, so he went down to Egypt. His wife Sarah was so beautiful that Pharaoh wanted to take her as his wife. Later, Abraham had a son named Ishmael with Hagar, an Egyptian woman. Ishmael is the father of the Arab nations. So right there, the family of Abraham has African blood. Then you have Isaac, Abraham's promised son. Isaac had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau married Canaanite women. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, had 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. One of those sons was Joseph. And here is where it gets really interesting. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers and ended up in Egypt. He rose to power and became second in command of Pharaoh. And Joseph married an Egyptian woman. Her name was Asenath, and she was the daughter of Potiphera, a priest of On. Genesis chapter 41, verse 45 records this. So Joseph, a Hebrew, married an African Egyptian woman. And they had 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. These 2 sons were adopted by Jacob as his own and became 2 of the tribes of Israel. So 2 of the 12 tribes have direct Egyptian, which means African bloodlines. Then the entire family of Jacob, all 70 people, moved to Egypt during the famine, and they stayed there for over 400 years. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13 prophesied this. God told Abraham, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. And it happened. The Israelites multiplied in Egypt, and eventually they were enslaved by a Pharaoh who did not remember Joseph. So for 400 years, the Israelites lived in Africa. They intermarried with Africans. They absorbed African culture. And when Moses finally led them out, guess what? A mixed multitude went with them. Exodus chapter 12, verse 38 says, "Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds." Egyptians and other Africans left Egypt with the Israelites. They became part of Israel. And speaking of Moses, let me tell you about his wife. Numbers chapter 12, verse 1 says, "Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite." Cush is modern-day Ethiopia and Sudan. A Cushite woman is a black African woman. Moses, the man who led Israel out of Egypt, the man who received the 10 Commandments, married a black woman, and his sister Miriam had a problem with it. She and Aaron spoke against Moses because of his Cushite wife. And you know what God did? He struck Miriam with leprosy. Her skin turned white as snow, and she was leprous. Some scholars believe this was God's way of showing that her objection to a black woman was sinful. God defended the black woman and punished Miriam. The point is, the Israelites and Africans were constantly interacting, intermarrying, and living together. This was not two separate groups. This was one family with deep African roots. Now fast forward to King Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 10 tells the story of the Queen of Sheba visiting Solomon. Sheba is believed to be either Yemen or Ethiopia. Ethiopian tradition says the Queen of Sheba, whose name was Makeda, had a son with Solomon, and that son Menelik became the first emperor of Ethiopia. The Ethiopian royal family claimed direct descent from Solomon for thousands of years, until the monarchy ended in the 1970s. Whether or not you believe that specific story, the point is clear. There were strong connections between Israel and Africa, and those connections continued even after the kingdom of Israel split and eventually fell. In 586 BC, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and took many Israelites into captivity. Then, in 70 AD, Rome destroyed the Second Temple and scattered the Jewish people across the known world. This is called the diaspora. And while many fled north into Europe, many others fled south into Africa. They went to Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, and deeper into the continent. Over centuries, they mixed with the local populations, but many retained elements of Israelite culture and religion. And this is where it gets fascinating. There are communities all over Africa that have maintained Jewish traditions for thousands of years. The Beta Israel of Ethiopia, also known as Ethiopian Jews, practiced Judaism long before any contact with European Jews. They kept the Sabbath, performed circumcision on the 8th day, followed dietary laws, and claimed descent from the tribe of Dan. In South Africa and Zimbabwe, there is a people called the Lemba.
That is not legend. That is DNA. In Nigeria, the Igbo people have traditions and practices that are remarkably similar to ancient Israelite customs. They practice circumcision on the 8th day. They observe a day of rest. They have kosher-like dietary restrictions. They have naming patterns that resemble Hebrew. Their language has words that sound like Hebrew words. And their oral history says their ancestors came from the east, from a place they were forced to leave. Now here is the critical connection. Where did the majority of enslaved Africans brought to America come from? West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, Senegal, the same regions where these Israelite practices and traditions have been preserved for centuries. The same regions where the Lemba and Igbo people lived. So when the slave traders came and captured millions of Africans, they were not just taking random people. They were taking the descendants of the scattered tribes of Israel. They were fulfilling Deuteronomy 28 verse 68. They were loading the Israelites onto ships and bringing them back into bondage in a strange land. And here is the part that will blow your mind. Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 says, "You will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves." Who were the enemies of Israel in the Bible? Edom, the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother. And who did Esau's descendants become? Many scholars and historical records suggest that Edomites mixed with other nations and their legacy carried into various ruling powers throughout history. But the key is this: the Israelites were sold to people who were not their brothers, not their kinsmen, but their adversaries. And what happened when the Israelites arrived in the Americas? They had their names taken away, their languages taken away, their history taken away, their religion taken away. They were forbidden to read. They were forbidden to gather. They were beaten if they practiced their own culture. Within a few generations, most enslaved Africans did not know where they came from. They did not know their tribe. They did not know their language. They were told they were nothing. They were told they had no history. They were given English names, Christian names, slave master names. And yet something survived. The spirituals, the songs. Go down, Moses. Let my people go. That is Exodus. Wade in the water. That is baptism and crossing the Red Sea. Swing low, sweet chariot. That is the hope of deliverance. These songs were not random. They were cellular memory. They were ancestral knowledge passed down through music, because it could not be passed down any other way. The call and response pattern in Black worship is ancient. It mirrors Hebrew worship. The rhythm, the clapping, the movement, the emphasis on community and testimony. That is not European Christianity. That is something older, something deeper, something that survived the Middle Passage. And even today, if you go to a Black church in America, you will see practices that are closer to ancient Israelite worship than anything you will find in a white evangelical megachurch. The passion, the crying out to God, the expectation that God will move, that is Torah-based faith. That is covenant faith. So here is what the history and geography show us. The Israelites were never a white European people. They were a Middle Eastern and North African people. They had constant interaction with Africa. They intermarried with Africans. They lived in Africa. And when they were scattered in 70 AD, many of them went deeper into Africa. They became part of the African tribes. And centuries later, those tribes were enslaved and brought to America. That is not speculation. That is documented history. That is oral tradition. That is cultural evidence. That is geography. And now modern DNA testing is confirming it. Let me show you what the science says. There is a genetic marker called haplogroup E. It is one of the major human Y chromosome DNA haplogroups. Haplogroup E is most commonly found in Africa, but it is also found in the Middle East, especially among Jewish populations. The subgroup E1B1A is overwhelmingly found in West Africa, the region where most enslaved Africans were taken from. But here is what is interesting. E1B1A is also found among some Sephardic Jews and Mizrahi Jews, the Jews who lived in North Africa and the Middle East. So you have the same genetic markers showing up in both West Africans and ancient Jewish populations. Why? Because they share common ancestry. Because the Israelites migrated into Africa, mixed with the population, and their DNA has been preserved in the people of West Africa. Then you have the Kohanim gene I mentioned earlier. This is a specific Y chromosome marker called the Cohen modal haplotype. It is found in Jewish men who are descendants of Aaron, the brother of Moses, who was the first high priest. The priesthood was passed down through Aaron's male line. And this genetic marker has been found in Jewish communities all over the world, even communities that have been separated for thousands of years. That is powerful evidence of a shared ancestral line. And guess where else it has been found? In the Lemba people of southern Africa. Genetic studies done in 2000 showed that a significant percentage of Lemba men carry the Kohanim gene. They are not just claiming to be descendants of Israelite priests. Their DNA proves it. The Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews, have also been studied. Genetic research published in 2012 showed that Ethiopian Jews have markers that connect them to Middle Eastern and Levantine populations, not just African populations. That means their ancestors came from the region of Israel, just as their oral traditions claimed. Now, does that mean every single Black American can take a DNA test and it will say Israelite? No. Because DNA testing companies do not have a category for ancient Israelites. They compare your DNA to modern populations. And after 2,000 years of mixing migration and dispersion, the genetic markers are spread out. But what we do see is this. Many Black Americans have ancestry from West Africa, specifically Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, Cameroon. And those regions are the same regions where we find cultural, linguistic, and now genetic evidence of Israelite presence. But here is the good news. If the curses were real, then the promises of restoration are also real. God said He would scatter His people, but He also said He would bring them back. He said He would judge the nations that oppressed them. He said He would restore them to their land and their identity. And that process is starting right now. We are living in the time of awakening. More Black Americans are researching their true identity today than ever before in history. Hebrew Israelite teachings are spreading like wildfire on YouTube, social media, and in communities across the country. Young people are rejecting the lies they were taught in school and church. They are reading the Bible for themselves. They are connecting the dots. Ezekiel chapter 37 talks about the valley of dry bones. God shows the prophet Ezekiel a vision of a valley full of dry, dead bones. And God asks, "Can these bones live?" Then God tells Ezekiel to prophesy to the bones. And as he does, the bones start to come together. Flesh forms on them. Skin covers them. But they have no breath. Then God tells Ezekiel to prophesy to the breath, and the breath enters them, and they stand up as a vast army. This is a prophecy about Israel being restored. The bones represent the people scattered, dead, forgotten, but God is breathing life back into them. They are waking up. They are remembering who they are, and they are becoming an army. That is what is happening right now in December 2025. The dry bones are coming back to life. Black Americans are learning their true identity, and it is terrifying to the powers that be, because once the people of the covenant wake up, the game is over. But before I show you what comes next, before I show you what God is about to do, you need to understand how this truth was hidden. You need to know who covered it up, why they did it, and how they got away with it for so long. Because the conspiracy is not a theory, it is a documented fact. And it goes deeper than you think. They did not just hide your history by accident. They erased it on purpose. They burned the records. They rewrote the textbooks. They painted the pictures. They built the churches. And they made sure that for 400 years, you would never know who you really are. Because if you truly understood that you are the descendants of the biblical Israelites, the entire system would collapse. The wealth would have to be returned. The land would have to be given back. The apologies would have to be made. And more than that, the spiritual authority would shift. Because the people who have been at the bottom would suddenly be revealed as the people God chose to be at the top. Let me take you on a journey through history. Not the history they taught you in school, but the real history. The one that shows how a glorious people became slaves, how their identity was stolen, and how the enemy worked for centuries to make sure they would never remember. It starts with the glory days. Go back to the time of King David and King Solomon, around 1000 BC. Israel was at its peak. David had defeated all their enemies. The kingdom was unified. Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, and it was so magnificent that queens from other nations traveled just to see it. The Bible says the Queen of Sheba came and was overwhelmed by the wisdom and wealth of Solomon. Gold was everywhere. Peace reigned. The nation was blessed beyond measure. But then something happened. Solomon, despite all his wisdom, started to drift. He married foreign women who brought their gods with them. He built altars to those gods, and the rot started to set in. After Solomon died, the kingdom split in two: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And both kingdoms began to turn away from God. They worshipped idols. They oppressed the poor. They ignored the prophets who warned them. God sent prophet after prophet: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Amos. All of them crying out, "Turn back, return to the covenant, remember the law, or you will face the consequences." But the people did not listen. The leaders did not listen. They thought they were untouchable because they were God's chosen people. They thought the blessings were guaranteed no matter what they did. They were wrong. In 722 BC, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom and scattered the 10 tribes. They were taken into captivity, and many were never heard from again. Then in 586 BC, Babylon came and destroyed Jerusalem. They burned the temple. They took the people of Judah into exile. For 70 years, the Israelites wept by the rivers of Babylon. Just like Psalm 137 says, they hung up their harps and could not sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. Eventually, a remnant returned and rebuilt the temple. But the kingdom was never the same. They were under Persian rule, then Greek rule, then Roman rule. By the time Jesus was born, Israel was an occupied territory. The Romans were in charge. The people were waiting for a Messiah to come and overthrow Rome and restore the kingdom. But Jesus did not come to overthrow Rome. He came to fulfill the law and the prophets. He came to offer salvation to all people, Jew and Gentile. And when the religious leaders rejected him and handed him over to be crucified, Jesus wept over Jerusalem. He said in Luke chapter 19, verse 41 through 44, "If you had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." And it happened exactly as he said. In 70 AD, the Romans, led by General Titus, laid siege to Jerusalem. They surrounded the city. Famine broke out. People were starving. And when the Romans finally broke through, they slaughtered over 1 million Jews, according to the historian Josephus. They burned the temple to the ground. Not one stone was left on another. The gold from the temple melted in the fire and ran down into the cracks between the stones, so the soldiers tore apart every stone to get the gold. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were taken as slaves. They were sold in markets across the Roman Empire, but many escaped. And where did they go? South, into Africa. They went to Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, and deeper into the continent, into regions that the Romans could not reach. And over the centuries, they mixed with the local populations. They became part of the tribes. But they carried with them fragments of their culture: circumcision, dietary laws, Sabbath observance, stories of a homeland far away. For over 1,000 years, from 70 AD to the 1500s, the descendants of Israel lived in Africa. Some maintained their distinct Jewish identity, like the Beta Israel in Ethiopia. Others blended in completely, but retained subtle practices. And during this time, Africa was not the backwards, uncivilized place that Europeans later claimed it was. West Africa had powerful kingdoms: the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire. These were wealthy, sophisticated civilizations with trade networks, universities, and systems of law. But then the Europeans arrived. First the Portuguese in the 1400s, then the Spanish, the Dutch, the British, the French. They came for gold, they came for spices, and then they realized there was something even more profitable: human beings. The demand for labor in the New World, in the sugar plantations of the Caribbean and the cotton fields of America, was insatiable. And Africa had millions of people. So they started the trade, the transatlantic slave trade. And here is where Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 kicks in. The Lord will bring you back to Egypt in ships. Not Egypt, the literal place, but Egypt, the symbol of bondage. And that is exactly what happened. Ships, slave ships. Millions of Africans, the descendants of the scattered tribes of Israel, were captured, chained, and loaded onto ships. The Middle Passage was hell on water. People packed so tightly they could not move, chained in their own filth. Disease spreading. Many died and were thrown overboard. Sharks followed the ships because of all the bodies. It is estimated that for every African who made it to the Americas alive, 2 or 3 died along the way. This was the largest forced migration in human history, and it was the fulfillment of prophecy. When they arrived, they were sold. Slave auctions, families separated, husbands from wives, mothers from children. Just like Deuteronomy 28 verse 32 said, "Your sons and daughters will be given to another nation," and you could not do anything about it. Powerless. For 400 years, from the early 1600s to the mid-1800s, this went on. 400 years, the same amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt the first time. Genesis 15, verse 13. God told Abraham, "Your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there for 400 years. It all lines up. The timeline, the prophecy, the curse. It was not random. It was covenant consequences. But here is the part that breaks my heart and should make you angry. While this was happening, the people who claimed to be Christians, the people who read the Bible, the people who went to church every Sunday, were the ones doing the enslaving. They were the ones justifying it. They were the ones twisting scripture to make it seem like God approved. And that brings us to the cover-up. How did they pull this off? How did they convince the world, and even black people themselves, that slavery was acceptable, that black people were inferior, that they had no heritage, no history, no connection to the people of God? Let me show you the mechanisms they used. And I am going to name names. I am going to name institutions. Because the truth needs to be told. First, they created the curse of Ham doctrine. I mentioned this earlier, but let me go deeper. Genesis chapter 9 tells the story of Noah getting drunk after the flood. His son Ham saw him naked and told his brothers. When Noah woke up, he cursed Canaan, Ham's son. Now the text is clear. The curse was on Canaan, not Ham, and not all of Ham's descendants. And it was Noah's curse, not God's. But European theologians in the 1400s and 1500s took this story and twisted it. They said Ham's descendants were black Africans. They said the curse meant black people were destined to be servants forever. They said it was God's will, and they preached this from pulpits. They wrote it into theological books. They taught it in seminaries. The Catholic Church, which had enormous power at the time, did not stop it. In fact, in 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued a papal bull called Dum Diversas, which authorized the Portuguese king to attack, conquer, and subjugate Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ. Then, in 1455, he issued another bull, Romanus Pontifex, which granted Portugal the right to enslave non-Christians in perpetuity. Let that sink in. The Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, gave written permission to enslave people. And who were those people? Africans. The justification was that they were not Christian, they were pagan, and therefore it was acceptable, even righteous, to enslave them. This is documented history. You can look it up. The Catholic Church, the institution that claims to represent Christ, gave its blessing to slavery. Then Protestant churches followed suit. In America, especially in the South, pastors used the curse of Ham to preach that slavery was part of God's plan. They said slave masters were doing Africans a favor by bringing them to a Christian land. They said slaves should obey their masters as unto the Lord. They quoted Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. Slaves, obey your earthly masters, but they ignored the verses that told masters to treat their slaves justly. This false teaching was so effective that even after slavery ended, it lingered. It became part of the culture. It justified segregation. It justified Jim Crow laws. It justified lynching. Because if black people are cursed, if they are less than human, then you do not have to feel guilty about oppressing them. But the theological lies were just the beginning. The next layer of the cover-up was the whitewashing of the Bible itself. During the Renaissance, from the 1400s to the 1600s, European artists were commissioned by the Catholic Church to create religious art. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. Leonardo da Vinci painted the Last Supper. Raphael painted countless images of Mary and Jesus, and every single one of them depicted biblical figures as white Europeans. This was not an accident. This was strategic. If the people worshipping in the churches saw Jesus as one of them, they would feel ownership of Christianity. They would see themselves as the heroes of the story, and critically, they would see people who did not look like them as outsiders, as others, as less than. These images spread everywhere. With the invention of the printing press, pictures of white Jesus were printed and distributed across Europe and eventually the world. By the time missionaries went to Africa, Asia, and the Americas, they brought these images with them. They taught the people they were converting that this is what God looks like. This is what holiness looks like. And if you do not look like this, you are less. Do you understand the psychological damage that does? Imagine being a black child, growing up going to church every Sunday, looking at the stained glass window of a white Jesus, and being told to worship him, to be like him, to aspire to be godly. But you do not look like him. Your skin is wrong. Your hair is wrong. The subconscious message is clear. You are not made in God's image. They are. This is spiritual warfare. This is identity theft on a cosmic level. And it worked. For centuries, black people worshipped a God who did not look like them and were told their own features were a curse. The third layer of the cover-up was colonial education. In the 1800s and 1900s, European powers colonized almost the entire African continent. The Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885 brought together European nations to carve up Africa like a cake. They drew borders. They claimed territories. They enslaved populations under the guise of civilizing the savages. And part of that civilizing mission was education. They built schools. But they did not teach African history. They taught European history. They taught that civilization began in Greece and Rome. They taught that Africa had no history, no culture, no achievements. A British historian named Hugh Trevor Roper said in the 1960s, perhaps in the future, there will be some African history to teach, but at present, there is none. There is only the history of Europeans in Africa. The rest is darkness. That is what they taught. Africa was darkness. Africa was savage. Africa contributed nothing. And the children who grew up in those schools believed it. They were taught to be ashamed of their own heritage. They were taught that anything European was superior. Language, religion, clothing, customs, everything African was backward, and this extended to the biblical narrative. They taught that the Israelites were Middle Eastern, sure, but they were basically white. They were certainly not black. The connection between Israel and Africa was downplayed or ignored entirely. The fact that Egypt is in Africa was treated as an inconvenience. The fact that Moses married an Ethiopian woman, that the Queen of Sheba was African, that Philip baptized the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8. All of that was glossed over. Why? Because if people understood the deep connection between Israel and Africa, if they understood that many of the people in the Bible looked like Africans, the entire justification for slavery and colonization would crumble. You cannot enslave the people of God and claim to be doing God's work. So the truth had to be hidden. And the fourth layer of the cover-up is happening right now in 2025. Suppression of the Hebrew Israelite movement. Over the last 100 years, as Black Americans started researching their own history, some began teaching that they are the true Israelites. Pioneers like William Saunders Crowdy in the early 1900s, Prophet Cherry and others founded congregations that taught this truth. And immediately, they were labeled as fringe extremist cult-like. The FBI monitored these groups under COINTELPRO, the program designed to disrupt and discredit black organizations. The media portrayed them as angry separatist, anti-Semitic. Mainstream churches rejected them. Academia ignored them. And most devastating, even other black people were taught to dismiss them as crazy. But the awakening is happening anyway. You cannot stop truth forever. And we are living in the time Ezekiel prophesied about. The dry bones are coming back to life. The people who were dead in their identity are waking up. The breath of God is moving, and no amount of suppression can stop it. So here is where we are in December 2025. The world is on the edge of collapse. The economy is crumbling. Wars are breaking out. Technology is being used to control and monitor every aspect of life. And in the middle of all this chaos, Black Americans are discovering who they really are. That is not a coincidence. That is prophecy. That is God keeping His promise. Now let me shift the tone, because I do not want you to leave this video feeling angry or hopeless. Yes, you should be angry about the lies. Yes, you should grieve the loss of identity and the suffering of your ancestors. But anger and grief are not the end. They are the beginning. Because once you know the truth, everything changes. You are not a victim. You are a victor. You are not cursed. You are chosen. You are not at the bottom. You are royalty that has been in exile, and the exile is ending. Let me speak directly to you right now. If you are a Black American watching this, I need you to hear me. You are not what they said you are. You are not a thug. You are not ghetto. You are not less than. You are a descendant of Abraham. You are a child of the covenant. You are part of a royal priesthood. 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9 says, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession." That is who you are. Not because of anything you did, but because of whose you are. Your ancestors survived the Middle Passage. Think about that. They survived the most horrific journey in human history. They were chained in the bottom of ships for months. They watched people die next to them. They were beaten, starved, and dehumanized. And yet they survived. Why? Because God was not done with the lineage. Because the covenant is still in effect. Because your bloodline carries the promises of God. Your grandparents survived Jim Crow. They could not vote. They could not sit at the same lunch counters. They could not drink from the same water fountains. They were lynched for looking at someone the wrong way. and yet they survived. They built businesses, they built churches, they raised families, they sang songs of hope, they held on to faith, even when everything around them said there was no reason to hope. Your parents survived the crack epidemic that was deliberately unleashed on black neighborhoods. They survived mass incarceration. They survived a system designed to break them. And you are here today because of their strength. You are here because God protected the line. You are here because there is a purpose on your life. Every struggle you have faced is not random. It is spiritual warfare. The enemy knows who you are, even if you did not. Satan knows that if the children of Israel wake up, his time is up. So he has been attacking you your whole life, attacking your mind with lies, attacking your family with division, attacking your community with drugs and violence, attacking your identity with false images and false teaching. But you are still here. You are still standing. You have survived everything they threw at you, and now you are learning the truth. Now you are waking up. Now you are stepping into your identity. And that terrifies the powers that be. Ezekiel 37 is happening right now, the valley of dry bones. God showed Ezekiel a vision of bones scattered everywhere, dead and dry. And God asked, "Can these bones live?" Ezekiel said only, "You know, Lord." Then God told him to prophesy to the bones. And as Ezekiel spoke, the bones started rattling. They came together. Flesh formed, skin covered them. But there was no breath. So God told him to prophesy to the breath, and breath entered them, and they stood up as a vast army. That is you. That is Black America. You were scattered. You were dead in your identity. You did not know who you were. But God is breathing life back into you. The bones are coming together. You are remembering. You are researching. You are connecting the dots. And soon, you will stand as an army. Not a physical army, but a spiritual army. An army that knows who they are and whose they are. And when that happens, when millions of Black Americans step into their true identity as Israelites, the enemy is done. Because you will have the spiritual authority that comes with being the covenant people. You will have the prayers of your ancestors backing you. You will have the promises of God activated in your life. And no weapon formed against you will prosper. Isaiah 54 verse 17. So I am telling you today, walk in your identity. Stop letting people define you. Stop letting the media tell you who you are. Stop letting a system that hates you set the standards for your worth. You are a child of the Most High God. You are royalty. You are priesthood. You are chosen. And yes, that comes with responsibility. You cannot just know the truth and do nothing. You have to share it. You have to teach it to your children. You have to live it. You have to return to the commandments. You have to honor the Sabbath. You have to study Torah. You have to build community. You have to prepare for what is coming. Because we are in the end times and the birth pains are getting stronger. So right now, before this video ends, I need you to do something. If this message has shaken you, if this has opened your eyes, if you feel something stirring in your spirit, I need you to take action. Do not just watch and forget. Do not let this be another video you scroll past. First, hit the like button right now. I am serious. This is not about the algorithm. This is about marking yourself. It is about saying I heard the truth and I'm standing with it. It is about leaving a digital footprint that says I was here when the awakening happened. Second, drop a comment below and type 2868. That is Deuteronomy 28 verse 68, the verse that describes the slave ships. Let me see who understands. Let me see who is awake, and tell me where you are watching from. What city, what state, what country. Let us see how far this message is spreading. Third, share this video. I mean it. Send it to your family group chat. Post it on your page. Send it directly to people you know need to hear this, especially older folks, the grandparents, the elders who have been searching for answers their whole life. They need to see this. This is their confirmation. And fourth, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because this video is just the beginning. There is so much more to teach. There are more prophecies to unpack. There are more lies to expose. There is more truth to reveal. And the enemy does not want you to have this information, so videos like this get suppressed. The only way you will see the next one is if you subscribe and hit that bell. You are part of this awakening. You are not just a viewer. You are a witness. You are a participant. You are part of the restoration. And your ancestors are watching. They are cheering you on. They are praying that you will be the generation that breaks the chains, that reclaims the identity, that walks in the truth they were not allowed to know. So make the choice right now, not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Are you going to accept the truth and step into your destiny? Or are you going to close this video and go back to sleep? The choice is yours. But I'm telling you, time is running out. The signs are everywhere. The economy is collapsing. Wars are increasing. Technology is tightening its grip. The mark of the beast system is being set up right in front of us. This is not the time to play games. This is not the time to sit on the fence. This is the time to choose. Before I close, I want to pray with you, and I do not care if you are in your car at work or in your living room. I want you to bow your heart. You do not have to close your eyes if you are driving, but I want your spirit to be humble before God. Because what we are stepping into is sacred. Father Yah, the Most High God, I come before you right now on behalf of everyone watching this video. I thank you for opening their eyes. I thank you for leading them to this moment. I thank you that in the middle of all the lies, all the deception, all the noise, your truth is breaking through. Lord, I pray for every person who heard this message and felt conviction. I pray for the ones who have been searching their whole life and finally found answers. I pray for the ones who are angry because they realize they have been lied to. Father, turn that anger into righteous action. Turn that pain into power. I pray protection over every person who is waking up, because the enemy is not going to be happy about this. He is going to attack. He is going to bring confusion. He is going to bring fear. But Lord, you said, you have not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So we stand on that promise. We reject fear. We reject confusion. We accept truth. Father, I pray for families to be healed. I pray for fathers to return to their children. I pray for mothers to be strengthened. I pray for young people to reject the lies of this world and embrace their identity. I pray for unity among your people. We have been divided for too long. We have been scattered for too long. It is time for the dry bones to come together. I pray for justice, Lord. I pray that every nation that participated in the slave trade, every institution that profited from our suffering, every system that continues to oppress us, I pray that you hold them accountable, not with our vengeance, but with your justice. Because vengeance is yours, and you will repay. And Lord, I pray for the return. I pray for the restoration. I pray that you bring your people back to covenant. Bring them back to Torah. Bring them back to Sabbath. Bring them back to you. Let this awakening spread like fire. Let it go into every city, every state, every nation. Let the children of Israel wake up and remember who they are. Shalom, family. You are no longer slaves. You are sons and daughters of the Most High. You are no longer lost. You are found. You are no longer in darkness. You are in the light. Walk in that truth. Walk in that power. Walk in that identity. The world is about to see who you really are. And when they do, everything changes. I will see you in the next video. Stay prayed up, stay woke, stay blessed. And remember, you are not here by accident. You are here by divine appointment. This is your time. This is your moment. Do not waste it. Shalom. Shalom.